A very pleasant evening to all. On behalf of the Alumni Association of the Department of English and Comparative Literary Studies, Saurashtra University, Rajkot, I, Dhwani Vaishnav, welcome you all to Professor Avadhesh Kumar Singh Memorial Lecture Series. This lecture series is a humble effort in memory of our dear teacher and founder head of the department, Professor A.K. Singh. Professor Singh has always believed in Sangachatvam, that is, moving together in harmony. Taking inspiration from this belief, we have attempted to organize this lecture series on the issue of changing climate, ecology, and literature, wherein we are trying to bring various multidiscipline thoughts on a common platform. Sir has always envisioned and tried to bring various knowledge systems together. We have been fortunate enough to have speakers from different disciplines sharing their expertise and helping us in continuing this tradition. Through this, we are trying to pay our sincerest tribute to Professor Singh on his first death anniversary. Today, it is a sixth lecture in this series by Mr. Julian Hollick, who is an award-winning producer and writer of radio documentaries. He has also been an independent radio producer for NPR, BBC Radio 4 and World Service, and CBC in Toronto. He has broadcasted a weekly program on Radio Midday in Mumbai. Sir has always also written on India in Smithsonian Magazine and the New Republic, and he had been a columnist for the Times of India and the Hindu. Mr. Hollick had traveled the entire length of Ganga by a country boat in the year 2004 and 5. Amongst many other books, he has also written two important books titled as Ganga, published by Random House in 2007, and Apna Street, published by Amay Prakashan Pune in 1994. Sir has also contributed several volumes about cultural aspects of India, and since 2012, he has taught an annual workshop on cross-cultural journalism at Xavier's College, Mumbai. Today, Mr. Hollick is going to speak on the many myths of Ganga. I welcome you, sir, on behalf of the Alumni Association and the department. Before Sir starts his lecture, I would request all the participants to keep their mic and video off for the better reception of the talk. If and when you have any question or suggestion, you please start your video or you can put your messages in chat box. Thank you, and over to you, sir.
Okay, if by any chance at any time of this, for any reason, my microphone cuts out and you don't hear me, somebody, whether it's you, Devani, or Mukherjee, who's there in the background about to murder me, just let me know, because nothing, I'm not touching anything, but something may happen, because we are, for those of you, she did not say, the only thing is I'm speaking to you from southern France, where it's 3.5 hours behind. It's just after lunchtime. It is extremely dry here, about 45% humidity, which for you would be, oh, you'd love to be here. But that makes it, outside temperature being 31 centigrade, 31 Celsius is much, much hotter because of the dryness of the air, just so that you know. So I would not go outside. This is by far the best place for me. Now, Dhvani was quite correct. I went down the Ganga. I worked for 30 years in India, and I decided at the end that to do a series on Ganga, because Ganga was the focus of almost everything that happened, not necessarily in southern India, but anything in northern and central India. It always came back to Ganga. I've been to various bits of Ganga during my time recording. I'd done the monsoon on the banks of the Kanpur, Ganga. I'd been to the Ganga in West Bengal, and I'd been also in Uttarakhand up to, no, I'd never been to the source. I didn't go to the source till 2004, but I'd encountered Ganga, had been present in my life a lot of times. And it's true that we did travel by country boat, but not always by country boat, because some of the areas, there is basically no road that goes next to the Ganga, and you have to travel We bought a Mahindra Scorpio because it could contain all our equipment and clothes and all of us, which was about 5 people. Our driver, who'd been with me for 30 years, he would go every day with one assistant, Raja, who I could tell you more about later. Raja unfortunately died in his bed in Calcutta when he was age 60, had a heart attack. They would go and they would scout out where we were going to spend the night. And this is important for you to know if you ever go to Ganga or any of the other major rivers. Because we had equipment, we had to be able to charge batteries. So it had to be somewhere that had a reliable source of electricity. Ashrams turned out to be the best. Also, they had walls that protected them, so nobody would come, and you could take your Mahindra inside, and nobody would come and break open and steal equipment. Where we could not go on the river because the roads were too far away, we would travel by the Scorpio to the next stop and then spend more time there and go out. We had 2 boats. One was a boat that was made for us by a man in Kanpur, which traveled down from Hardwar to Kanpur. It was a very small boat for 3 people. We had 2 oarsmen for that, and progress was quite slow. We then traveled by Mahindra from Kanpur to a place near Allahabad, Singhpur, where we spent many days. And then we went on to Varanasi, where we spent about 2 weeks, and then on by Mahindra to Patna. After that, we were entirely on the boat for the rest of the way, right down to Ganga Sagar. So it was a mixed trip. It was done in 3 different stages. The first stage was in April of 2004, was up to Gomukh and Gangotri when the snows had melted and you could get to Gomukh. And this was before the Indian government or whoever is now in charge of the path up to Gomukh had decided to limit the amount of people, whether Indians or Ferengs, going up there. So we were basically, there was maybe 10, 20 people on the whole trip up there. That was very marvelous for all of us because we literally were, when we were up in Gomukh, we felt we were in the abode of the gods. You had all these huge mountains behind. The snow had just come 2 days before. The sun was shining on it. We could make our way slipping and sliding up there. And it was a glorious experience. But that had to be at the end of April because the snow had melted. We then did the major part of the trip from October till late January, from Hardwar right down to Ganga Sagar. And I did a further trip a year later when I received a message from a Bengali filmmaker who we'd met to say that a village that we had gone to, whose name I've just got to remember what it is because I can never pronounce it. It's Panchanandapur, which is basically just inside West Bengal after the frontier with, well, what's the state there, Jharkhand. And it's near the old city of Gur, which I never visited. This village where we stayed 2 or 3 nights, it was very, very nice, had vanished. The monsoon had literally crumbled over half of it into the Ganga. The Ganga shifted course dramatically. So he asked me to come up, get on a plane, come up to Panchanandapur or whatever the city was nearby where I could get by rail and go and see. In fact, it was like a bomb, like Beirut had happened earlier this month or last month. The whole part of the village was now a big pond. This I didn't spend my time looking at water. We went out in a boat the other side, and we discovered that what Ganga destroyed with one hand, it giveth back with the other. About 5 kilometers across Ganga, which is that broad at that time, it must have been probably October or November. There were char, which more than sandbanks. There's like sand. If you call them a sandbank that's about 2 or 3 kilometers wide, which had suddenly reappeared as the river had shifted course. And the farmers who in Panchananpur had gone over there and discovered, to their great joy, their old fields, all the markings for their fields had now come up under the water, and they went back to farming. And they were obviously these fields were extremely productive because they had lots of new fresh silt. But there was a major problem. Neither West Bengal nor Jharkhand wanted to admit that these people existed. There were about 25 to 50,000, I can't tell you the exact number now, people who had moved back from Panchananpur on the east bank to these charlands and were farming it. There was neither state was willing to acknowledge that these people belonged to them, either for voting, for healthcare, for schooling, for investing in roads to cross the Char. So the people had to do it themselves. They formed if you like, a little anonymous republic there was no name for it, the Charlands. And presumably they're still living there, because I don't think the river has shifted anything like as violently since then as it did in 2004, 2005. So this trip was therefore in 3 different stages. We were lucky enough, or I was lucky enough, to go back that third time to see what had happened, how savage Ganga could be, how destructive of a very productive village and the surrounding lands. And one of the things to note, which is too technical probably for you here, is that old rivers that you find in books about the rivers 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, they had caused Ganga to shift and joined up behind this village. The geography was continually changing, and it will continually change again, which is why most of the efforts of the Indian government and its various ministries to control where Ganga goes are always going to be doomed to failure, because Ganga has a mind of its own. Now, we said that, we get it out of the way. How many people were on this country boat? There were five of us, Ferengs, Westerners, including one professor who had helped me a great deal. There were 5 oarsmen who were fishermen from Bihar, who one of them was also a cook. All the cooking was done on board the boat. And there were about 5 Indians, professors, postgraduate students, a doctor. I don't know why he was there, because none of us was sick, but it was very nice that he was there. And we all traveled, therefore, from Patna down to Gangasagar. So that's the logistics of this. Now I'm going to, because I sent a printout, but I don't know if you read it. Ganga has essentially 2 different characteristics. The northern Ganga, the first half of it, down to basically Varanasi, is distinguished by a mixture of mythology, some severe problems because of lack of water running out, far too much farming in the sugarcane belt, which is basically north of Delhi, in the area from Hardwar down to about Kanpur. But as soon as you get into Bihar, Ganga changes personality completely. Mythology becomes a lot less important. And when I mean mythology, I mean that, for example, in the area between Kanpur and Varanasi, what predominates is Ramayana. Every place, every tirtha, every sacred crossing has something to do with some story in Ramayana. Here, for example, in one village we stayed at, this was where Ram, Sita, and Lakshman had crossed the Ganga to go into exile. The geography doesn't really work out if you look at it closely, because they end up near Nasik. Now, how on earth did they get from Nasik? You know, they'd have to cross country. It's not logical. It doesn't have to be logical. At least they crossed the river. And when you get to the second half of Ganga, it becomes, mythology disappears. Ganga becomes a very savage river. It destroys as much as it gives back. It has 4 huge rivers that come into it, which I remind myself what they are, because otherwise I forget. The Son, that's the one that comes from the Deccan. Then there's the, I've got to get this right, because otherwise you'll murder me with my pronunciation, won't you? The Gagara, the Gandak, and the Kosi. The Kosi is another extraordinarily violent river. In the case of, in the space of 200 years since the 18th century, the Kosi has changed course no less than 200 kilometers from where it was. They all those 3, Gandak, Gagara, and Kosi, they come from Nepal. They are, nobody basically taps their water for energy. They're too inconsistent. They will just not pay attention to whatever somebody builds as a dam, just go around it. Destroy as much as they giveth. You then end up, Ganga takes a bend to go down towards the Bay of West Bengal. And back, how many years ago? 50, 40. The exact dates I've got somewhere written down, but you just need to know it's within Mukherjee's lifetime and several other people's lifetime. The Indian government decided that Calcutta was basically silting up. So it did something quite logical. It decided, if we can direct the water of Ganga down into Calcutta, we can flush out the silt into the sea. And we can make Calcutta viable again for decent-sized ships to come up. So they built a canal. They built a barrage at Faraka, huge barrage, with a road that crossed Ganga. And they built this 100-kilometer canal, which goes down and then joins Ganga again, and it flows to the sea. But they also cut off, or should we say hobbled, truncated, because Ganga flows into Bangladesh, and where it's called the Padma. And they had a treaty in, I think, about 1968, if I'm right, where they decide how much water Bangladesh was to get and how much water India was to get. And of course, when the monsoon is not flowing in the winter months, and what are you doing, Jogesh? You're making signs. You want to go somewhere? Okay, I'll leave you. They there's always a fight between Bangladesh and Delhi about how much water is in fact going to Bangladesh. So every time you read it, you know it's that treaty again. It's being interpreted, reinterpreted by the two sides, and nobody is ever happy because there is not enough water. Padma, I've been down most of it. It suffers from exactly the same problems as Ganga, which are all, of course, will come later to the lack of water. Again, the river shifts along the border between Bangladesh and West Bengal quite capriciously. I couldn't say violently, but capriciously. By that I mean, one year we crossed Ganga and we went on to land that's still in India, and you could look down on Padma. Next year, it had all shifted. What that land we'd been on was now underwater, and Bangladesh was claiming it for its own. That's why you will read sometimes in the press that, particularly to do with Bangladeshi migrants into West Bengal. It's a good question whether they are migrants, because they may have been Bangladeshis and next year they find they're in India. And so then they're classified by Calcutta as being illegal migrants. They're nothing of the sort. A year later, Indians will suddenly find themselves Bangladeshis because the river has shifted. You generally, in geography, the frontier between two countries when it's a river, the center channel is called a talweg, and that's where usually, in theory, that's where the border is. But when a river shifts 1 kilometer, 5 kilometers, or whatever every year, the talweg, the center line, the frontier between the two countries, shifts as well. So no, it's a nightmare, a godsend for international law, is a nightmare for everybody else. Let's decide whether people are Indian or Bangladeshi. Now, having said that there is two basic characteristics, this bit I want you to maybe take a note. You can argue with me, and I'm happy for you to argue anything you want. There are three basic rivers. Ganga is not one river, one name. The first river is basically the Himalayan Ganga, which runs from Gomukh. It joins at, what's the place? I've forgotten now. Been there, where the two streams come together to form Ganga. It'll come back. Look at my map. See, I have a map here. Would it? And of course, it doesn't. I'll find it for you in a second, because I had lots of maps done, and if I've forgotten, it's simply because I'm getting old. I'm forgetting these things. Okay, Devrayag. You should know Devrayag. Oh, thank you very much for showing the map. Okay, that helps. Devrayag is where the Alakananda and the other one, whatever it is. Can you see it on that map? I don't think you can. They come together. Devrayag is a very nice place. It's the Alakananda, and what's the other river? Anyway, they come together there. And then it officially becomes Ganga then. And it flows down towards Rishikesh. But of course, people being, I was about to say Indians being Indians, but it's not. Anyone would do it. It's happening in Ethiopia, between Ethiopia and Egypt. A river is a source of power. So you dam it and generate electricity. And therefore, something very odd is going on with these pictures. Shilpa Mishra, what are you doing? It looks like you're doing exercises. Okay, now you stop doing exercises. They put a huge dam, they built a huge dam across Ganga up there in the Himalayas. And the problem is, okay, it generates lots of power. What happens to the water? Because everyone else needs the water down below. So you can only release a certain amount of water. And you build a artificial channel to take water round or under or through the barrage, the dam, so that when you get to, say, Rishikesh and then to Hardwar, there is enough water for everyone to be happy. But the trouble is they're never happy either. When you get to Hardwar, you're in basically the plains. And you've got about another 1,000 kilometers till you get to Varanasi. Hardwar to Kanpur is an area where a lot of water is taken off for agriculture, for sugar beet farming. A lot also of chemical pollution flows off the fields into Ganga there without any way of capturing it. It flows straight into the river, and so the river carries a lot of things that it shouldn't carry. There is also a lot of sand mining there because the banks in this area between Hardwar and Kanpur, which is used for, obviously, for construction in Delhi, in the cities of UP, because sand is money. So most of it is illegal. It's mostly bribery. So it's Ganga is in bad shape because a lot of people are abusing it. It is also losing a lot of its depth as a river. Before, it was maybe 50 years ago, it was about 100 meters deep in places. For example, where the Ram Ganga enters it from the north in that stretch between Hardwar and Kanpur, you can still find dolphins. And I once asked somebody, why do you find dolphins so far north, Gangetic dolphins? Because it's a confluence of two rivers, Ram Ganga coming in, which is a major river in that area from the Himalayas. And where you have two rivers coming in, you have a lot of churning, and therefore you have a lot of small fish for the Gangetic dolphins to feed on. So you do find them as far north as that. You could do a little aside now about the Gangetic dolphin. Yes, it exists, but it exists in pockets and not as a continuous. You won't find a Gangetic dolphin that comes from West Bengal swimming up to Hardwar and then back down again. There are about 2 or 3 separate pods of Gangetic dolphins, one in the north between Hardwar and say Kanpur, because unfortunately there's also more dams there which the Gangetic dolphin cannot flow around. So everywhere you put a big dam, north of it, you've got a probably dwindling population of Gangetic dolphins. Farakka obviously totally cuts off the dolphin from going downstream into West Bengal towards the sea. It also prevents major fishing nowadays of hilsa, which is a very popular fish in West Bengal, which simply cannot flow up the feeder canal. There's no way, nobody's thought of building fish runs for the fish to go up. So fishermen are basically in the area between Patna and Farakka are losing their livelihood because the fish, instead of being that big, is now that big. Whatever fish. So there are Gangetic dolphins there that again are cut off from the Gangetic dolphins south of Farakka. You'll find some in Padma. You will find yet again another little group in south of in southwest Bengal, flowing into the sea, but they're all cut off from one another. They can't intermarry. There is no sex life for a Gangetic dolphin outside his particular area. So yes, they're endangered as well. And you know, maybe that in China, where there were dolphins in the major rivers, or 30, 40 years ago, now they're officially, the Chinese have decided they've disappeared because they were cut off again by dams. And when you build a dam, there's no way a dolphin or a fish can go around it unless you build a fish run. All right, so that's the Himalayan Ganga. It falls a great distance very fast. It's something like what I wrote is 3,000 meters in 300 kilometers out of the Himalayas. So that's the temptation where everyone wants to put a dam on Ganga. Or north of Rishikesh, on some of the feeder rivers, they built a lot of dams. They weren't built when I went there. They've been very quickly built since, which again have slowed the flow of water going down to the big dam and therefore going south to Hardwar and then into the Ganga proper. What happens is that there is basically south of Hardwar to Kanpur, there's not enough water coming down, okay? There's not enough new sources of water, apart from this Ram Ganga that I told you about, and that's also under threat because they put another dam on that as well. So you can walk across Ganga in certain periods of the year in that southern part. The river is like dreadlocks. It spreads into various channels. You could get totally lost, go up a one-way street and discover that it ends just in a little sandy pond. It's a very difficult area. We did not go down it in boat because, having read Eric Newby's tales of going down there in the 1960s in a kayak, I could not, in all conscience, take engineers and photographers and whatever down there to get lost. I would be blamed. We'd get lost easily, and we'd waste a lot of time doing it. So that part of it we did take down to Kanpur. No, not down to Kanpur, down to a small village called Chiasa, where the river was once again one. There wasn't a second river. We couldn't get lost. And that's where we took our little boat, Basanti, for three people, and rowed slowly down, stopping the night in ashrams, down to Kanpur, where we finally arrived. Kanpur, they built another dam to divert the river so that it flows past Kanpur, and to attempt to push enough water into Kanpur to make sure that the Ghats have enough water for bathing. It doesn't work. It never does work. And Kanpur, as you may know, has a very bad reputation because of its tanneries, which put chromium, what is it? Chromium, it's CO6, whatever that is. It's very toxic. It's used in tanning hides. I've seen it, smelt it, not drunk it, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So I've spent a lot of time in the tanneries. The tanneries were promised that they would get financial aid to build their own treatment plant in South Kanpur. Nothing has ever happened. Either the money has been stolen, which is perfectly possible, or whatever happened, the thing has never got built, or people haven't put in their contributions to be members of it. So toxic chromium waste is still poured into Ganga. And The environmental groups cry bloody murder because the water quality in Kanpur is very poor. But, and this is the strange paradox of everything about Ganga, less than 100 kilometers south, or the measurements by which you generally measure the health of the river, it's dissolved oxygen, particularly dissolved oxygen, have totally recovered. And so by the time you get to Allahabad, next flashpoint for major industry and just putting things into the river that you shouldn't put, it's quite a healthy river. But of course, in Allahabad, they pour things in they shouldn't pour in. So that by the time when you're at the Sangam, you've got Ganga coming from the north, and there you literally can walk across it up to your knees before the monsoon. And then at the Sangam, you've got this extraordinary sight. It's like a Y junction. And the bottom half of the Y is the Yamuna. Now, remember, if the person who's from Delhi would know that Yamuna is brain dead in Delhi. It even catches fire sometimes. There's no dissolved oxygen at all. And so the people give up on it and say, this is a dead river. Yet, 20 kilometers south of Delhi, the dissolved oxygen levels have gone back to normal. This is something I cannot explain. I don't think anybody can really explain why this happens. I have described it in a chapter in my book on Ganga as the mysterious factor X. We can come back to this because there's something that does happen that's quite odd to Ganga, that it always has this capacity to restore itself. Anyway, here you are at the Sangam. You've got Ganga, which is really a feeble old doddering river. Nothing, it could be, you could stop it there and put it into retirement. And then this Yamuna, which is deep green, deep, really mean deep, joins it at the Sangam, and you can take a photo of the Sangam. We've got several photos, I just put a comment, I couldn't read it. You can literally see the line where the two rivers join because they're different colors. Ganga is muddy, brown, tired, exhausted. And you can stand on the ridge, sand ridge, where these two meet. And Yamuna won't push you over, but it's pulsating, it's lively, it's a huge amount of water. So really, the next part of the river shouldn't be called Himalayan Ganga at all. It should be called Yamuna, not Ganga, because it's Yamuna that gives, basically, it's a blood transfusion to the river. If Yamuna didn't join it there, Ganga would be dead. Yamuna Ganga lasts about 400 kilometers. Basically, it flows through Varanasi. It goes as far as Patna, and then it takes its third avatar, which is Nepalese Ganga. Yamuna Ganga is the focal point of most of the mythology of the Ramayana and the various other Puranas or whatever. Okay, somebody's wanted to put their microphone on. I don't know.
Yes? Could I interrupt?
Yes, where are you?
Yeah, your only part of your face is seen.
Okay, part of my face. That might be an advantage. Okay, is it now better?
It's okay.
I can see all my face.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for telling me, Mukherjee. I know it's you. You're like I couldn't escape from you. I couldn't rob a bank with you either. You'd be on to. Okay.
Yeah, please.
So this area between basically Kanpur and Varanasi is what I call sacred heartland of Ganga. It's where mythology mixes up with all the various Gangas, the goddess, etc. And that's where people go to take Ganga Jal, etc. Most of them to take it back because they can take it back down south. And therefore its second characteristic, second avatar. Nepalese Ganga is where it joins that savage Ganga that I was telling you about, where it changes personality completely. There's much more fishing in theory in Nepalese Ganga because there's much more water. That's where most of the dolphins exist. There's a dolphin sanctuary about halfway down. It's quite a large area, about 170 kilometers wide. I have recorded Gangetic dolphins there, which make a very strange sound, and I'm sure none of you have heard the sound of Gangetic dolphins, who are blind, and they exist underwater, and they make a sound that's a cross between electronic interference and pigs snorting. Totally unromantic. On my website, there is 30 seconds of the sound of Gangetic dolphins. The website is, because Vani never gave that out because she didn't have the information, it's ibaradio.org, www.ibaradio.org. Somewhere in there you will find, if you okay, all right, Dvani, what's this? Yes, you're right. Thank you for putting it up there. She's put it up there. There is, under one of the rubrics, you can go and you can find the sound, listen to the sound of Gangetic dolphin recorded in Bihar, Jharkhand, in the dolphin sanctuary. It's quite interesting if you've never heard it before. The problem basically in this area, can you still see me? Yes, you can. I've got to be good with my head, otherwise he'll talk to me again. The river is extremely broad. It changes its course every year. It has a huge amount of water that basically is not going anywhere. It's siphoned off, some of it, by farmers illegally to their fields. They break down a bit of the wall of the canal so the water goes into their fields. It's also an area of dacoits. It's the nearest time I've ever come to being captured and tortured. We were rowing one morning, and we suddenly saw these dacoits on the river bank on the bicycles with their rifles. They were looking, thank goodness, north. We were south. The people rowed, the 8 oarsmen, the 5 oarsmen, it was 8 because we all took a hand to row, rowed as fast as we could, as though we were going for an Olympic title, and we managed to escape them, turning around and looking to see where we were. That's in this area. Dyes that were famous, where jute also comes from. It's largely a dead area now because artificial chemical jute and what's the famous dye that's purple comes from there. Somebody will supply it to me. I've just forgotten it off the top of my head.
Indigo.
What? Indigo, yeah. You're right. Thank you. You really have some uses. I should employ all of you to help me. My memory is going. There is nothing, we could never travel by road there if we wanted to, because the road is only one road and it's a long way away from the river. for sensible reasons. If it was near the river and the river changed course, the road might disappear the next year. It's not until you get around the, I think it's called the Raj Mahal Bend, where Jharkhand and West Bengal come together and it goes down towards the sea, that you suddenly come back, if you like, not to civilization, but suddenly you get a lot more activity. India, it changes totally. Instead of being this deserted, not backward, because it probably isn't backward at all, but very deserted area, suddenly the place is teeming with people. There are boats going crisscross across the river when you didn't see any boats at all when you were in Bihar and Jharkhand. So it changes yet again, and Faraka is a problem, major problem environmentally, because you know what happens when you build a dam across a river, particularly in India, don't you? I hope you do. Basically, silt builds up behind the gates. So the river level rises, the bed of the river rises, everything gets altered. Not for the better either. So I think of about the 108 gates of Faraka, about 50 at any one time are silted up. They can't open them because there's too much sand. So they built this canal that goes down, that bypasses it to take water to flush out Calcutta. It's a totally artificial experience. You're going down in a narrow canal lined with cement. You see nothing until you get basically to the end, and suddenly you're back in, if I said civilization, that might sound condescending, but suddenly it's West Bengal. There are temples, there are vibrant towns. It's in fact, the Ganga no longer resembles an Indian river at all. You can see why the British liked it very much up there, because it resembles the Thames in England. It's sort of very tranquil, peaceful river. There are nice trees, weeping willows there. There's the Murshidabad, the ancient capital of West Bengal, is there. It's a totally different civilization you suddenly entered. You get Chandigarh, you get these strange towns that are built. Chandigarh, which is built, Chandanagar, which is built basically rather like Versailles, the same roofs on the river, until you get to Bengal, where for the first time Ganga actually is majestic. It's only 100 years too late because the capital has moved. And you have problems that there is too much silt south of Calcutta, which prevents large ships coming up to Calcutta and bringing produce and bringing things back. So the port of Calcutta is, I think, the maximum that it can take is about an 8,000-ton ship, which is not very big in these days of 100,000 ton tankers. So nothing really can come up there. Calcutta as a port is dead. They've tried to build artificial ports south of Calcutta to get larger boats up there. It doesn't work either. Now, until you get to Gangasagar, and there you're back again in the sort of romantic, mythological area. Gangasagar is where the Rishi couple has his little temple. You know this story about how somebody replied in your little thing, put their microphone. Do you all know how Ganga came down to earth and the role of Rishi couple in this? Somebody talk to me? Nobody talk to me? Okay. Do you know how Ganga came down to earth in mythology?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I should ask you to tell me how, just see if whether it's the same story, because there are many stories. Do you know about coming to Earth in Gangotri and shattering the Earth and how she came down in Shiva's locks of hair, right? You know that one?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I won't bother to tell you. But you know what the Muni Kapil, what his role in the Ganga Saga was? He froze with his eye the 60,000 sons. Think about this, if any of you are about to become mothers. 60,000 sons of, which king was it now? It doesn't matter which king it was. It was Bhagirath who lifted the curse. That was the grandson. Anyway, shriveled them to ashes. And so the king sent his other son, because his wife had, he only had one wife, but he had two, if you like, litters, one 60,000 sons, one son, Anshuman. So Anshuman went off to look to see where the horse had that was doing its bit to limiting what his lands would be, had wandered off to. He found the horse down the Bay of Bengal, and he found this pile of ashes, and he found Muni Kapil saying, well, you know, they annoyed me. I was meditating, so I shriveled them up. What can I do? You know this. I hope you know this. I'll be very quick with it. Okay, what do I do to bring them back to life? Because my parents are really very upset about this. Didn't quite say that, but something like that. So he said, well, the only thing you can do is to get Ganga to come and flow down over the ashes and bring them back to life. So he went back up to, I guess, Deprayag or somewhere there, wherever his father was meditating, and said, this is what Muni Kapil says. So they appealed to the gods. The Ganga come down from Milky Way to save the 60,000 souls from being burnt to ashes. And that's why if Ganga came down to Earth, it would be such a cataclysmic event, it would split the Earth. So that's when they decided to involve Shiva to ask him whether he would let Ganga come down through one of the locks of his hair so it would lessen the impact. And that's what, if any of you been to Gangotri? Yes, sir? No, sir? Have you been to Gangotri? There's a pool there.
Yeah.
Okay, you've been everywhere, Lula. Okay, so but if you've seen the pool there, it's quite extraordinary. It's maybe 100 meters deep, of various colored stones, and that's officially where Shiva let Ganga down. So she flowed down, happily down all the way for the next 2,000 odd kilometers to Ganga Sagar and washed over the ashes, and they all came back to life. Okay, I've been to Deprayag. No, okay. You've been to a lot more places than I think. Is it totally imaginary, the story? It can be imaginary, but it has a basic truth that a friend of mine in Delhi once said. It's the monsoon every year brings back life to most of the northern India. It breathes back life, and that's how you should understand this metaphor of Ganga washing over the ashes and bringing them back to life with the 60,000 sons. You shouldn't interpret it as a true story. It's a myth. It's an allegory about bringing back life to the land. Okay. So anyway, so we've got these three basic rivers. So the Himalayan Ganga, the Yamuna Ganga, and the Nepalese Ganga. The Nepalese Ganga, as you I'm sure are aware, various people in Delhi have had this bright idea for at least 20, 30 years to take a lot of the water from the eastern Ganga and shove it back west to parts of India, around Delhi, etc., or even around Maharashtra, around Mumbai, that lack water, to bring back life to them. Say, why we've got all this water in one side, can't we do it? Because it doesn't work. In India, of all places, it doesn't work. Why? Because India is extremely inefficient about transporting water in canals. About 60% of water that is transported in existing canals, nothing to do with river linking, just existing canals, is lost through either evaporation, the walls of the canal are not kept up, and so it's siphoned off by farmers for their fields. So the idea of shifting water from east to west, given that this is India, any country would probably be the same story. But India particularly wouldn't work. Maybe China would work because they'd be super efficient with it. They just ride roughshod over the farmers' wishes. But it's never going to work because of this simple reason. It also probably requires a lot of engineering for water to go up hills, to be pumped from east to west. It's probably a non-starter, not a good idea to have you spend all your money on trying to bring water from east to west. So you've got these three different rivers, and they have therefore their environmental problems are different, each of them. The northern Himalayan one doesn't have enough water, enough sources of water, and yet it's the area where everybody takes the water off for irrigation, for industry. Somebody asked me the other day, I won't say which, one of your little circles of people, I think it's Stefani actually, said, I asked them, I said, where do you think, what is the major source of the use of Ganga water? And they said, industry. I said, no. Agriculture. 80% of the water of Ganga is taken off by agriculture to feed the hunger of farmers. So if you grow the wrong crops, and sugar beet is the wrong crop, you're the most water hungry crop you can exist. But it's very important because sugar beet farmers are very important patrons of major political parties in Delhi. So you don't want to anger them by saying you should really plant something else. So that's why they continue to plant and cultivate and extend their sugar beet plantations. What's that tree? Forgotten it now. It's come back to me. The tree, in particular in the west of India, that when you're told to plant trees to bring back vitality to the countryside. Again, what is the tree? Somebody help me.
Thorny tree. Bush,
yeah,
kind
it's a tree that it's very thirsty for water. It's planted a lot in places like Rajasthan. It just escaped me because I can't remember all these things after all these years. We're getting old and tired.
Escapes me.
Eucalyptus, that's what it is. Eucalyptus tree. Okay?
But there is another one in Saurashtra.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're all the same sort of family. They're very water thirsty. They use up a lot of water. They plant them because they're quick growing. You can cut them down. You can use them for building, etc. For all the wrong reasons. And this, basically brings me to the conclusion of this. I've got to give you the myth about Saraswati before I go there. Most of the solutions for these three different Gangas are totally inappropriate and are counterproductive. In the north, because they won't face up to the fact that they planting the same crops, sugar beet, that are basically totally antithetical to the long-term health of Ganga. They're damming it, which is great for your cities so that you can have electricity, but you're basically killing the river every time it's like cutting off an arm. In the middle area, the Yamuna Ganga, there is enough water, but in that area, particularly in Varanasi, nobody is actually measuring the effect of heavy metals sinking to the surface. Now, you all know of the Sankat Mochan Foundation or the Sankat Mochan Temple, right? You must have heard that in Varanasi. Maybe it's not so famous in India.
Yes, I have been to the place.
Yeah, Dear Badri Mishra used to be the Prashant of that. And he also had various ailments which were caused by daily swimming in Ganga. He sort of admitted to me on tape, but he said, I've spent all my whole life bathing every day in it, so how am I going to disavow Mother Ganga? Nobody really knows what the long-term effects of heavy metals on the river bed, particularly between the stretch between Kanpur and Varanasi, are going to be. There's no real measurement. The Sankat Mochan Foundation measures the health of the river with one tragic exception. They don't measure the heavy metals because nobody ever gave them the money to measure heavy metals. Does Kanpur tanneries and the chromium dioxide, does that have a long-term effect when it's sitting on the riverbed for hundreds of years? Will it have a long-term effect on the health of the river? No, on people, therefore on people's health. Nobody knows because they've never measured it. The third area of the Nepalese Ganga, what you do with this water that's just pouring off, if you try to capture it for hydroelectric power, you're doing the same problem that dams cause everywhere in Asia. There's a build-up of silt behind them, and they become quickly quite inefficient. The Ganga action plans, which have been going on so long, I was present when Rajiv Gandhi inaugurated the first one in '86. There's one story that you need to know about the Ganga action plan from '86, and it's been repeated down through the years, whether Modi also makes the same mistake. They're always designing plants to treat Ganga water as it is now and never in the future. So in 1986, they built huge water treatment plants, secondary plants in Kanpur and Varanasi. You think, wonderful. Look, you're students and you're interested in the environment. So if you were designing this plant, would you design it for the amount of water that was in 1986, which is when you and I are living, or would you design it for 20, 30, 40 years when it maybe the amount of water flowing into it may be 50%, might be 100% more? Now, you don't have to answer, put on your microphones. I mean, I think it's a common sense. You design it for a much greater flow of capacity. But believe it or not, these wonderful engineers, they designed it for the amount of water in 1986. So you go 20 years later and you discover that it can treat 1986 volumes of water, but the volume of water is 50%, 60%, or maybe 100% more than it was in 1986. So what happens to the raw water that doesn't get treated? It flows off into the Ganga. And I've got lots of lovely photos, I think they may be on the website, of the slipway south of Varanasi at 10 o'clock in the morning in the winter, after the monsoon, several months after the monsoon, when they release it and just pours down off the slipway into the river. and goes and pollutes the river all the way to Patna. In other words, I would have no confidence in anything that the Indian government proposed, because there's no overall strategy that covers the river as a whole. And plus you have the various states, Uttarakhand, UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, that it's a federal system. You can't necessarily dictate to them how they should coordinate. They don't coordinate. Most of the towns, for example, in UP, haven't paid their electricity bills to the UP. Jal Nigam is the water. I can't remember what the electricity one is. They haven't paid the bills. So when you're in somewhere like Kanpur, 9 a.m. in the morning, the fan and the air conditioning stop. This happens the whole way down. So I'm not very optimistic that a viable solution, a viable political solution, is going to be found, because it's almost requires too much coordination. It would require India to stop being India and to be, I hesitate to say China, but I don't think China could do it as well, because you'd get exactly the same problems. You can't have a unitary country run from one center where none of the existing states exist. You know, that Shanghai doesn't exist, etc., etc. And therefore, these different states with their own different political parties, who's in power, their own bureaucracies that may or may not be good. They're all working little pieces of it. There's no coordination. There's the financial aspect. I don't know if anybody's ever really sat down and said, to do the entire Ganga, do it properly with a central authority that can override the other authorities. That's an important question, that can override them. Would cost X and it could be done. I don't know if it can be done or not. I don't know. There may be much simpler solutions that could be done for stretches of it. For example, one of my consultants at IIT Kanpur had proposed using settling ponds that would remove about 60% of the pollutants in 1 hour. Were they ever adopted? No, because nobody could agree where they were going to expropriate the land to build the settling ponds. So that it's all stillborn. There was a similar idea around Varanasi to divert the river into a treatment area. But again, the political will was lacking, so it was never done. It hasn't been done, and by the time the political will arrive, it'll be too late. So it's a very difficult thing, and it's quite depressing to think that this river cannot be treated. It just limps along, and if it wasn't for the fact that Yamuna, Kosi, Son, Gagara, Ganga basically inject so much water into it, it would die. If it died, it would die in places. Most of it would be still alive, but other places would be dry and become fetid pools. If it happened, then the mythology of Ganga as a goddess that could heal, that could not be polluted, would be seriously called into question. And therefore, people might actually start thinking, ordinary people, peasants, farmers, shopkeepers in places like Varanasi and Kanpur might actually start thinking more about, maybe we should do something about this river, because it's no longer going to protect us. It's no longer going to take our ashes to heaven, because it's going to be dried up and people are dying from it because of various illnesses. It'll only change that if the situation gets serious enough that major changes. Okay, I've well exceeded my time. I'll be very quickly and tell you the other myth, because I said myths. It is commonly believed that the river Saraswati does not exist, correct? None of you said, okay, you haven't had time to turn your mics on. Saraswati existed. It still exists. It flows basically from the Shivalik Hills down through Rajasthan into the Rann of Kutch, and it used to flow out to sea. What happened was about 2,500 BC, in other words, well over 4,500 years ago. There was a major earthquake in the Himalayas, the southern Himalayas and the Shivaliks. The source of the water for Saraswati was basically Yamuna. It got cut off about 5 or 7 kilometers. The river completely shifted. There was no way that the water was going to come from Yamuna into Saraswati. Saraswati was the original holy river of the first Veda. And Saraswati would carry your ashes to heaven, etc., would cure diseases. And when Saraswati was basically blocked off, its source of water was blocked off, it lost that role. It took about another 1,000 years before the various pundits, pretty worried, it's no use, this river is we can't pray to it anymore because it's not going to do all the good. So they basically decided to elevate Ganga, which also flowed out of the Himalayas like Yamuna, to take over from it. So a lot of the powers that were attributed to Saraswati became attributed to Ganga in the post-Christian era. It's comparatively recent, Ganga as a holy river. And Saraswati continues in Indian mythology as one of the 3 rivers that join the Sangam in a Triveni. It's totally Saraswati has never flowed anywhere near Allahabad. It always flowed straight into what would you call that? It's not the, I suppose, the Saudi, the Arabian Sea. If you doubt me, read the books of Michel Danino, which are in Penguin. He'll give you chapter and verse of the various studies that the British Army undertook in the 19th century in the valley from Delhi to Karachi, where they discovered, surprise, surprise, fresh water running underground. And fresh water, because that was where the Saraswati came. Saraswati still exists in the monsoon. The basic parts of the river, there's a town called Saraswati in Rajasthan. Parts of the river come alive again, and you can get water, and then it goes underground when the monsoons come by, and it keeps on flowing. It's not brackish water, it's fresh water. So it does still exist. And 99% of Indians do not know that Saraswati exists. They think Ganga has been eternal. Ganga is no more eternal than Saraswati was eternal. One day it also could die, and other rivers would take its place. I'm not quite sure which rivers, but it could happen. Okay, there's something else also called mysterious factor X by bacteriophage. We can come to that in the question. I better finish now because I've talked too long. It's very easy to talk, Right. Okay, well, this is Lost River Saraswati. Thank you very much. You always got, you see, there it is, the book.
I would, sir, before there is a vote of thanks or question and answer, I would just like to display 2 images that Mr. Hollick had asked me to share with you.
Yeah, what are
and
they?
then sir can give you the brief about that particular image.
Yes. Come on, I'm waiting to hear about this.
This is the first one.
Yeah. Okay, that is Singh. you want me to tell them where Singapore is? That's a village about 30 kilometers north of Allahabad towards Kanpur. We stayed at a lovely ashram there. It's where I first bathed in Ganga completely and discovered it was deliciously soft water, which was totally unexpected. Singapore is where Sita Lakshman and Ram allegedly crossed Ganga to go into exile. It has also some very unusual features of water cleaning that date from several thousand years ago. It's an extraordinary place. It's a very small village. You normally wouldn't go there. What's happened now?
This was the another image.
Yes. Okay, that's the other image. That's the book, yeah, which I didn't take the photo of. The other photo was taken by my wife. That's her copyright. This was the cover photo for the Random House India book on Ganga. That's Varanasi.
Yeah.
Okay, now, come on, you can all ask me questions because I've been thoroughly boring and too long-winded. And there's so many of you, I don't know who you are. Okay?
Well,
Dhvani, come
Mr.
on.
Hollick,
Oh, it's Mukherjee again.
hello.
Yes.
Yeah. There are questions on the mysterious factor X. One group of questions on that.
Okay.
And the other group of questions, people would like to know if you have had a similar experience with any other river, such a unique experience.
The answer to the second question is no, I haven't. I've been certain of the other rivers of so-called sacred rivers, 7 sacred rivers of India, the Kovri and the Godavari, and I have been in Yamuna, obviously, and the Narmada. So I've been 4 of them. I recorded a series about the Narmada Dam 30 years ago. In May, the worst month you could possibly choose. And I was dying of thirst and the equipment had stopped. The Mahindra Jeep had stopped. We had to walk. And any of you, if you really haven't got any source of water, there must come a stage about 1 kilometer into your walk and you say, I'm going to die of thirst if I don't. And being good 21st century people, you would probably prefer to have boiled water than simply to take water, brackish water, any water that was offered you. I didn't have a choice. There was only one peasant mud hut. The woman said, my water, I haven't boiled it. I said, doesn't matter, give it to me. So I drank it and it saved my life. Many years later, I remarked to somebody when we were going down Ganga, 12 years later, I said, it's very strange. I haven't ever got ill going down Ganga. And they said, sir, that's because Ma Ganga's been looking after you ever since you took her waters at Narmada. Wasn't such a stupid answer. It could be true for all I know. I may have that one drink from the peasant well may have contained something. I've never been ill since. Never. I've been totally, I never took any Western medicines or whatever. I've always been absolutely fine when Ganga. Okay, what was the other question? That was the second one. That was the easy one. Okay,
the mysterious factor X.
Yeah, what about it? You want me to tell you what it is? I can't.
Your explanation.
Okay, well, where I was very intrigued. It started as not as a joke. It just started as a little thing I would ask people when I was traveling down there. What is this mysterious power that Ganga has to cure illnesses and send your ashes, take them to heaven? And I got various explanations. Some they were plausible for a minute, and then minute 2 they weren't plausible. First one was somebody in an ashram north of Kanpur, who there's some photos on the website, I think, and he said it's gandak, sulfur in the river bend. And this seemed very plausible for about one day until I said, but wouldn't sulfur kill everything else in the river? And a scientist, a Western scientist in New Zealand said, yes, it would. It's not the answer. Then somebody in Kanpur, a biologist, said there's this mysterious thing called bacteriophage, which I'd never heard of before. And he described it like the sort of Mexican wave, that it came down from Gomuk in 24 hours down to Ganga Sagar. 24 hours. And basically wiped out any infectious diseases or whatever. It was like a giant Mexican wave, 2,500 kilometers in 24 hours. That's a hell of a rate. And it just seemed rather implausible. But actually he hit a word, the bacteriophage, but nobody could come up with an explanation of what it was until many months later. One of my other consultants, an American woman who wrote a very good book about Varanasi, which basically explained how people of Varanasi, pandits and normal people, ordinary people, made a distinction between the river as a river, water, that could be polluted because you could clean that. And the river as goddess, who could never be polluted and would always cure that. And it was a fascinating book. Her name is Kelly Alley, Alley. It's well worth reading. It's called, because it's still the Bible, even in India, for this. Okay, it's called On the Banks of the Ganga. When wastewater meets a sacred river. As far as I know, it's always been in print. I don't know if it was a PhD thesis, but it's an extremely important book if you're interested in this subject. Anyway, she said, I've just met somebody at a conference in Massachusetts who said, you're to get in contact with him. He's a former head of AstraZeneca, and he's got a company called Gangetic, and they're developing medicines based on bacteriophage. So I went to see him in Bangalore, as it's now called, and he explained to me how bacteriophage worked, what they were, and it's undoubtedly one of the factors that makes Ganga unique, but not the only factor, because all Indian rivers, in fact, all water bodies have more or less bacteriophage in them, which are tiny little, smallest, not creatures, I don't know what you call them. They can't swim. They kill viruses, or they disable viruses. Don't kill them, they disable them. It's sort of perpetual struggle. They multiply very, very fast, and they basically keep a river and people healthy. And you'll still find in northern India, down as far as Calcutta, you'll still find quite a lot of families who were brought up drinking a glass of bacteriophage in the morning, and it kept them. Your comments are too fast. I get diverted with them, and then I realize I'm still talking. One of my friends in Delhi, who was the daughter of a doctor, reminded me several times recently that she and her sisters always used to have to drink a glass of Ganga in the morning because it was laced with bacteriophages. Said her father, being a good researcher, made sure that it contained enough bacteriophage, and it always kept her healthy. And she's healthy. She's still alive at 86 and going strong. It's not the only explanation. because it doesn't explain why Ganga rejuvenates itself and rejuvenates itself in its quantity of dissolved oxygen. That seems to be down to a mixture of various microbiotic substances that you'll find in Ganga, but do you find them in other rivers? Nobody has done the test in India. They've only ever tested Ganga to find that these things, Ganga has a unique mixture, but then you can't use the word unique because they've never gone and tested in, say, the Yamuna or the Godavari or the Kaveri or the Narmada to see whether they also contain the same things. Partial tests were done for other reasons in Kaveri and Godavari. And they found that indeed they had the same characteristics of micro enzymes in their water. But the tests never had any follow-up because the tests have to be funded by usually the government of India. And as you know, you have a current government of India who likes to believe very much in Hindu mythology of the most basic sort. There's not necessarily any opening for new theories or the input of scientific theories to back up or make sense of mythology. I'm not even going to go in there because we may have some Hindu advocates who are going to shoot me down. Luckily, I'm in France. You can't shoot me physically. Okay, so the Mysterious Factor X, I gave it that title, and I got a shock of my life about 10 years ago when somebody sent me a editorial from the Times of India mentioning my name as being the proponent of this theory. Well, it actually was somebody in India who said it, Mysterious Factor X, a professor up in Hardwar. I adopted it slightly. There is something mysterious in the waters of these major rivers, whether it's the sun that exacerbates them and brings them to the surface. I don't know. All of them, after all, do have a lot of sun. Is it the soil of the riverbed? Do they have the same sort of soils? Nobody's ever done tests about this. It would cost quite a lot of money. It would have to be funded within India because the Indian government does not like such things being funded from outside India for obvious cultural and political reasons. At the moment, it's just a supposition, but nobody, as you know, because you're all good, if you're not scientists, you understand the scientific method, has never been able to get the money to go and actually do a detailed study. A professor at IIT Mumbai wanted to do it, and he couldn't get the money to do it. He was very sympathetic to this idea. So he never got funded. Next question. Mukherjee, you can't ask another one for at least 5 minutes.
I
Yes?
was actually putting forward other people's questions.
Oh, you are? Okay. Sorry, I will not let you. Okay. Because they all got such nice photos. And, you know, I'm looking at Parul Moda's photo. Where's Parul?
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
come on. Ask me another one, Mukherjee. Come on.
No, I mean, Dhwani herself is asking you a question about over the period of time that you have interacted with Ganga, Indian people,
Yeah.
and this mythology that that drew you here in the first place. There is a question: what brought you to Ganga, for example? There is that question. Was it the stories behind it, the mythology that interested you? How did you get started?
Well, of course, you never really get started like that. I understand your question. You know, it was always there, Ganga, when I was doing other stories. When I spent 6 months on the banks of Ganga doing monsoon, because I decided to go and spent time in Kanpur because there were villages on the river, Bitor in particular. There were farmers. It was a microcosm that was an ideal place to study it. And I became conscious of the river for the first time, okay? I think when I really became interested was when I realized that the question of, mythology always has a basis in fact somewhere, even if it's very far-fetched initially. I mean, I told you the story about the ashes washing over the water washing over the ashes of the 60,000 suns, which is essentially a metaphor for the monsoon bringing back the land to life every year. So there's always some link to a real event that happens. Mythology does not spring up just like that out of thin air. I got to a stage where I'd done most stories about most parts of India, but I wanted to answer this question: how does the River Ganga how does it unite all this in popular imagination, particularly obviously in the north? In the south, that it does hold sway in popular imaginations is undoubtedly true, but I mean, you're talking about several thousand kilometers away. So I wanted to know this. So I read up all about the mythology, often in the books of Diana Eck, I must admit, who wrote a very good book about the sacred geography of India a few years ago. Very interesting. But what Diana Eck did not acknowledge, which made me mad, and I've met her, so I do know she's a proud woman as well. She did not acknowledge that the other major rivers of northern India also had these same characteristics, that they could cure you of disease because of bacteriophage and microorganisms, and they could also take your ashes to heaven, which we don't know really what happens, of course, but they had these same characteristics. Yamuna in particular was seen as a much more loving river, as was Narmada. Oh God, she's flashing things up. Yes, she's very good, this Devani. I got to employ her somehow as my assistant. And I must confess that when you're going to do a major series, okay, you've got a question you want to answer. What is this river? Does the mythology about the river, what is it, and does it have any basis in fact? I never knew there were 3 different rivers until I traveled it. You go where the money is. I'm sorry, it's as simple as that. There was major money through the National Science Foundation, which the very thing terrified me. The Science Foundation, I know nothing about science. And one of my professor consultants despaired of me because he had tried to explain at great length how the River Ganga basically eroded a riverbank and then deposited the earth lower down on the other side of the bank. So that's why the river changed course completely. And since nobody's raised, not even Janma, who is now alive on my screen, she's now got off. Nobody has asked me, and I'll say it now, it is a myth that deforestation causes siltation, and the siltation flows right the length of the Ganga, and so eventually, from the Himalayas, you find the earth that's lost from the slopes of the hills around, say, Hardwar, Rishikesh, or whatever, the Shivlik Hills, you'll find it down pretty soon in the Bay of Bengal. You don't. It's impossible. The studies have been done and shows that I don't know how they were done, but they were done by reputable scientists that show Indian scientists. It was shown that silt carried from deforestation travels only about 10 kilometers a year. That would take a long time to get to the Bay of Bengal. It's important to know that basically silt does not travel down, washed down by the water very far indeed. It forms new river banks fairly soon after it gets washed down into the river. Okay. So that, anyway, that wasn't the question you asked. What was the question again? I'm very good at giving answers to questions that are not asked. Mukherjee, come on. I can see you there.
Okay. No, there are questions about, I think I spotted two questions about the particularities. You have spoken a lot about North India.
Yeah.
There are two questions about the peculiarity and the particularities of the myths of the Bengal, the Ganga in Bengal, in the Sundarbans and in the deltas there, and the mythology there.
There's much less mythology because basically when you're in the Sundarbans, if you've traveled there, the river is huge, and it's basically the physical aspects of the river that, you know, their silt does get washed down and it forms new islands in the Bay of Bengal. I mean, I've been on some of these islands. The year before, the island wasn't there. Now you could walk on it, tie your boat up to it, and you would find animal bones there. So how did the animal bones get there? And in one year, a tiger somehow had died there, or some other large animal. There's not the mythology, if you've ever read any of the stories about it, it's much more, I can't say Bengali, that sounds a contradiction in terms. I mean, it's much more to do with, there was a very good book, Dvani, you're going to have to look for this, by a man called Ed Dimmock. He edited a famous story in Bengali, this was a long time ago, he's long since dead. And it was about, you find this same sort of story in, I don't know if you find it in mythology in the north. It's a very Bengali type of mythology. But basically on a couple's wedding night, they've been told that a snake will enter their bedchamber and bite him tragically in the ankle, and he'll die, and so she'll never. No, I don't know if it's that, but it's all right. We'll find it out. It's I can't. It's somewhere in my vast books. That's better. Yeah, Mukherjee. I think it's you're on the thing. The man's name is Ed Dimmock. He's dead now. D-I-M, maybe 2 M's, O-C-K. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, which had a lot of very good professors who were very sympathetic to things Indian, and they knew that bit. They knew how to read Sanskrit, and they were good scholars. And I couldn't put my hand on it. I've got it somewhere in this house. And in the story, okay, so they have spent their wedding night in a metal bulletproof bedchamber. But they got to have some air coming in after all, otherwise they're going to suffocate. The snake comes in through that little vent and bites him. So she has to, despairing, I mean, you know, marriage probably isn't even consummated. She is told, what she asks some sage, what can I do to bring him back to life? And she has to assuage the goddess of smallpox and various other goddesses, and it flows down Ganga from basically Murshidabad to the Ganga Saga. Yeah. She builds a raft, puts him on the raft, his body, and the rest of the poem it's about 80 pages long, is about what happens on that raft. Basically, one fish decides, they see a bit of dangling arm off the raft, they bite it and eat it. Not very much of the man survives by the time they get to the other end. And I have to read the book to remind what she does. He's brought back to life. Okay, so they live happily ever after. That's a sort of very typical, that's West Bengali mythology. It's nothing to do with the Ramayana and Northern India at all. It's to do with Bengali gods and goddesses and stories.
Yeah, there are folk beliefs about the goddess Bono Bibi in the Sundarbans.
Yeah, I know. It's totally different forms. Mukherjee, I should remember. That's a Bengali name. I'm in trouble now. Gangataka Osa, what's that? I don't remember if that's the name. I'd have to go and find the book. I read it recently, about 10 years ago again. It was a very good little book. I met the man actually in Varanasi where he was doing research. What? She rides it. Okay, you also wonderful, but if she rides a fish, I'm sure it's in Bengal and not in the north. Ganga, I've never come across any of the imagery riding a fish you couldn't ride a fish in the Himalayas where it's falling so rapidly. It's extraordinary. You couldn't do it. What? Okay. Was that the answer to your question? I've forgotten now. You're about Bengali, about the mythology there. The mythology in Bihar and Jharkhand would be basically a cross between the Bengali, and it would certainly not be the mythology of the Ramayana of the first half of Ganga, the Himalayan Ganga. That's very much bound up with the Ramayana, with the source of the rivers.
Interesting observation about South India, referring to Ganga, the potable water, as Ganga, especially rural South India. There is Professor Chandramouli observing that. You were mentioning about what happens to Ganga in the South India, and so it is still referred to.
Yeah, well, often in mythology down, say in Karnataka or even Kerala, particularly Karnataka with Kovri, basically it's the same sort of, if you like, foundation myth. How Ganga came down to earth, how that river came down to earth. Godavari is supposed to be the elder sister of Ganga in Maharashtrian. Where's that Maharashtrian person? She come back and tell me I'm wrong. The mythology there is all about the local god that brought down the Godavari River. Ganga is the junior sister. So in southern India, and I suspect also in eastern India, they don't accept as gospel all the stories about Ganga, Yamuna, Krishna, and everything. It's much more that they have their own gods and goddesses, how they explain how the river came. Narmada, if I seem to remember, is the same. I know less about Narmada than I do about Godavari and Kovri, which I found extremely interesting because the imagery, the references in various Puranas from the south are exactly the same. This is why I don't take issue with Diana Eck, because that's entirely a northern Indian version. When I first worked in India for about the first 5 years, it never occurred to me, because nobody ever told me that, you know, what you're learning is a Brahmin version of history. It wasn't until we were in Nepal, in Bihar, living in a village which had a heavy Adivasi and Dalit component. And they gave us a whole set of paintings, which I still have in this house, of their version of how the earth was created. Totally different from the standard, if you like, Brahmin versions that you get in all the books in the West, probably in India as well. It came as a revelation that was a totally different set of stories. Some of the characters sort of overlapped each other, but there was more than one version, more than just a Brahmin version of telling the story. And that's what you find in the South. There's a local goddess. It's essentially the same sort of story, how a river became sacred or whatever. But it's fascinating when you go and study these things to discover the similarities and discover that they're basically the other rivers and the other people who have temples doing research at universities around, they don't refer to Ganga. You know, Ganga has imposed herself thanks to very good advocacy on the part of various pundits. For example, I have never come across any explanation of so I can't, you know a lot more than I do. I get these little pop-ups telling me things that make me feel quite inadequate. That what was I about to say before that pop-up threw me off? I mean, it's simply amazing that people never have thought to ask the same sort of questions, apply the same sort of methodology, look for the texts for the other rivers. One or two people have. Mostly, I don't know if there have been Indian scholars. I know the Western scholars, usually in the United States, who've done it. And they're very fine books, and they're always quoted by Indian scholars, particularly about Yamuna and Godavari. It's fascinating, but it's rather like the river Ganga itself, you know, trying to clean it up. There's no overriding, nobody's ever written a story, and I'm certainly not going to, because I don't understand, I don't speak all the various languages that I'd need to for the source material. Nobody has ever done a study comparing these rivers and showing the similarities and suggesting this heretical notion that maybe, you know, Ganga is not the only river that's going to take you to heaven and cure you of diseases. A lot of these other sacred rivers, and maybe others that are non-sacred in the canon, may have the same characteristics. I mean, this, I can't say yes or no. I'm just throwing that idea out, that it's worth looking at in the literature, because I know you will find that in particular Yamuna and Godavari and Kovri, those three. Narmada I learn less about, but you'll find all the same sort of things. They all have these wonderful characteristics. Some of them are less nasty than others. Ganga tends to be not the nicest. Yamuna tends to be very nice. It's supposed to be the goddess of love, the river of love. And Narmada, I seem to remember, also has a lot of very nice characteristics. It's not going to do anything very bad to you. I have no idea about some of the other rivers, but the message is that basically Ganga is not unique. The other rivers may have the same characteristics and the same benefits. And the question is, why are we not interested in India and outside of India in these other rivers? Right, next question. Come on, we've got. So how are we going to do for time? What?
I think fair enough. I mean, enough of mythology. There was a question about the historicity of pollution on Ganga. I mean, how far back do these tanneries go? Surely to the British times.
How far back does what go?
The tannery industry, the leather industry.
The tannery, you know when the tannery industry was created, don't you? Do you?
I mean, not exactly. I don't.
Okay. Kanpur is a British colonial creation. There may have existed a village there beforehand, but the British basically needed a place to a center where they could build saddles, make various other things that needed leather. And they settled on Kanpur. It's about 3 million people now, maybe bigger. It's an artificial creation from about 1810 of the British. Okay, it didn't exist before Kanpur. It's not some city going back into Hindu mythology. So the industry, I've never read a history of Kanpur. There's a limit to what I can read. To know when they really developed it, but that it was developed for the British Army in India as the center for supplying everything is true. Now, whether that means the tanneries only date from sort of the mid-19th century, probably. Why Kanpur? What's so special about it? Well, I suppose it was on the Ganga, so the waste from the treatment of the hides could be washed away into the river. Okay, but it's probably 150 years, no more than that. Total. There are, I can't remember what the official, whether it's 50 or 120 tanneries. Some are very small, some are very big. They're very jealous of their privacy. I used to have to pretend that I didn't have a tape recorder at all and didn't wear any headphones and just press the button when I was sitting at the table with them, and just to get anything. Sometimes you could just tell. I remember we went to one tannery where the owner looked like death. I mean, his skin he looked as though he'd been poisoned by too much chromium. And that's the only explanation. He just looked like he was ready to die next day of poison. Others were very healthy businessmen who would be traveling off to Delhi. This one of the old-fashioned ones, he looked like death itself. It's the only thing. Oh, let's say Ganga Snar. Too quickly, I couldn't read it all. That saying that you just flashed on to me. Anyway, who's this coming from southern India? The students from. Okay, next question, Mukherjee. Come on, you're acting as command central.
No, not really. But I would like to now take you to, in your experience as a person on environmental issues. There are.
What's your question? Come on, specific.
No. There are more in the West, though. There are people who are known as the cornucopians, who believe. The people who believe in the horn of plenty about the earth, not just rivers.
Yeah.
And so about environmentalists, how do you categorize them, or anti-environmentalists, like these people who believe that basically the earth will still go on, like you said, the water of Ganga will still go on. Fueled by, yeah.
Okay. Mukherjee, it's not my specialty. All I will quote to you was something that I studied about various religions and their attitudes. I'll put to one side Hinduism because it's not, it has certain ideas that appear very sympathetic to mental concerns, but it's not clear that they're talking the same environment that we're talking about in the West. For example, except in Marathi, you will not find a word. I'm going to be corrected by somebody in one of these little boxes immediately. You'll not find a word for the environment in any Hindi language outside Marathi, I think. I'm waiting for see a little buzzer saying, "You're wrong, sir." It's largely a Western word, and the concept is Western, which raises the question of when you find a journalist in Varanasi who's writing gorgeous editorials about environmentalism in India and why this needed a greater sense of the environment is needed to save Ganga. But they don't, basically the word is foreign to most people's culture. If you talk to a fisherman in Varanasi, they don't know what you're talking about. It's a different word you have to use, Chaitanya or chain of being or what's it called, the other word, a vessel, in which man is essentially in Hindu, not mythology, it's not mythology, it's Hindu intellectual, I suppose, conceptualization, is part of the chain of nature. Now, I'm not sure, because I've never studied enough about Indian environmentalism to know whether this is simply a convenient one paragraph thing that I've read, and it means something. I'm sure that all you students will be able to enlighten me much more about this. But when you get to Christianity and Islam, they have a radically different attitude, which informs basically how we see something like improving the health of Ganga. Particularly in Islam, but Christianity is the same. Basically, nature, the environment, is for man's enjoyment. He can improve it in order to give thanks to God. Okay, this was certainly the 19th century Victorian idea. And you'll find it also in the modern Chinese attitude towards nature. In other words, you can build the Three Gorges Dam because, you know, I was about to use a swear word, but I'm not going to say, you know, the environment, it doesn't count. The environment is for man's enjoyment, is for the betterment of man. That's the important thing in Chinese thought. So that, for me, might be very important.
You might be interested.
What?
You might be interested about this, that this began in the West, in the Judeo-Christian knowledge system. What Francis Bacon in his Advancement of Learning spoke about nature primarily being a playground for human beings, the superior creature by God, and therefore nature should be bent and controlled.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But I don't think that this is necessarily be agreed to or understood by, if I said most Indians, I don't think I mean that your students here are part of the alumni, because they've been exposed probably to a lot of non-Indian ideas or travel. I would suspect, because I don't know, that the average Indian, if you met him in a marketplace or in a village, would not understand the Western concept of nature being for man's enjoyment.
Correct. Yeah, I think we are on the same line on that, right?
Yeah, okay. We've agreed on something. Okay, next. Look, I've been talking I must have exceeded my allotment of time, no? No, still there.
I think so. Among the people who are still present here, do you want to interact directly? Do you have a question?
No, I want to them other than by you. You're very carefully and very nicely acting. I can see you at your desk.
Oh
But
yes, I am still at my desk.
I don't know if any of them have got specific questions for me. Adib Singh has left the meeting. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
There's some very interesting people here. Lopa Das, how can you show a photo of yourself as flowers? You're not a flower. Can you see Lopa Mukherjee? Can you see Lopa Das's image?
Beautiful flowers, yes, yeah, very nice flowers.
We know she might be an absolute raving beauty. Nice flowers, huh?
Yeah, yes, of course, one can believe that.
Erin Bijou is interesting as well. What is that? It's some sort of
pattern, beautiful orange.
Yeah, but it's water and what? Okay, and I don't even know who's off my screen. Oh,
but we have had people from all over India, all across India.
It's wonderful.
I need to thank you on behalf of the Alumni Association of the Department of English and Comparative